นะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะพุทธังธัมมังสังฆังนะมัสสามิ Good evening, blessings to you all. One of the central teachings, or the central teaching in Buddhism, is the teaching on anatta, not self. That indeed everything in this world is impermanent, unsatisfactory, and not self, we say. When people practice vipassana meditation, they're focusing on these three universal characteristics, one of them being anatta, not self. And the Buddha explained that really what we take as a self, this body, this mind, is just an idea. When we say it's a self, that's an idea, it's a concept. But it's actually, when you strip it down, this body, this mind, there's nothing you can find there that is a permanent, lasting entity that you could call a self. Partly he needed to really emphasize this teaching because in India at the time of the Buddha, but just generally the unenlightened thinking of human beings is that we keep creating a self. We want to believe in a self. We're often trying to find some kind of eternal self. We interpret our experience from that idea of a self. Or perhaps less common, but still around, is the view that there is nothing. It's all there's just nothing. What we call an annihilationist view. There's nothing at all, no good, no bad. When you die, there's nothing there. You came from nothing, you go to nothing. But probably more common is the view of a self. There is a self. And so often we get asked the question, as a Buddhist monk, you get asked the question, what is the soul? We like to believe in a self because probably most commonly is just we've been taught that by the people around us. Everyone else believes in a self, so we believe in a self. Culturally, socially, even religiously, we're encouraged to view our experience from the point of view of there is this self, me, a person. You could say we're brought up to think like that. The unenlightened human mind just constantly is looking for, reinforcing this idea that everything we have, do, think, experience is a self, an expression of self. But the Buddha was encouraging us to try to be more open-minded and at least question our experience. Don't just take it for granted that there is a self or that there isn't a self, but actually look and learn. And this is why the cultivation of the Buddhist path, and particularly mindfulness and then wisdom or insight, is taking us on a journey, you might say a journey of analysis, looking, learning, one of questioning our experience, just putting putting the view or the belief that there is a self to the test. But at the same time, the Buddha also pointed out that in order to see through the delusion of self, we have to be in a fairly good space. We have to be at ease with ourselves. So like, if we're really stressed or suffering, your mind, when you're experiencing a lot of pain or suffering, it's difficult to see through the sense of self, because it becomes the sense of self when we're suffering. That's who we are, that's what we are. We say, I am suffering. It's very difficult to get perspective on that. So this is why the Buddha encouraged us to cultivate the path, develop what we call skillful dhammas, wholesome dhammas, or kusala dhammas, because it's helping the mind, put the mind in the best space so that it can look and learn from its experience. Because when we are stressed, it's hard to understand things, to know things clearly, see things clearly, to know the way things are. If you're stressed, that's probably all you're thinking about is, I am in pain, I'm suffering in one way or another. You might say, well, I don't have time when I'm stressed to contemplate or understand whether there's a self or a not self. I'm just that stressed, that's all I know. I'm unhappy, I'm afraid, I'm anxious, I'm worried, I'm fed up, whatever way the stress is manifesting, or if it's physical pain and discomfort. When you're stressed, that tends to be all you know. That's the first thing that comes up in your experience. And we can straight away slap a sense of self or a label of self onto that experience. That's what stress does to us. It makes a feeling of there is a me, an I, that is hurting, unhappy, not getting what I want, getting what I don't want. So the Buddha encouraged us to cultivate the path and cultivate good karma, even if you are cultivating good karma with a sense of self to start with. You're still deluded. We don't really have much choice in our practice. We have to begin from this place of there is a self who makes good karma, makes choices, good and bad, in order to deal with the immediate sufferings of life, to calm down a bit, to bring up a sense of well-being. So, if you don't have enough to eat, or you don't have any money to pay your rent, or you buy the things, the basic essentials of life, well, that would be your first goal maybe in life, just to get enough to survive, to get by with. But having achieved that, then you may also focus on earning a living in a good way, an ethical way, a moral way, not to be causing trouble to yourself or others, or harming yourself or others as you go about your business every day, so that you generate at least a basic sense of well-being. So this sense of self is at least peaceful on one level. We put effort into cultivating friendly relations with the world around us as best we can. Try to earn our living in an honest way, so we're not at odds with the law or people around us. I think most of us understand that. You try to build up your life on one level so that you have the basics that you need. You're happy, you have a sense of well-being. If you're living in a family, developing that sense of well-being with your family, your neighbours, work colleagues, and society as a whole. You might say that's your first goal in life, to achieve that. And that's all done with a sense of self. But that doesn't matter. At least have a good sense of self. Be at ease within yourself. Be at peace with yourself. if you can achieve that, then already that's one step up in the practice. But then the Buddha said, well, look more carefully, more closely at what's going on in your experience. This thing we do take as a self, and you say, well, I'm happy, I got enough to eat, I got a place to live, I got good friends, I've got money in my pocket, I don't have much suffering. Well, that's good. That is something that we're all aiming to achieve, maybe. But then take a deeper look, closer look at what's going on. And you should notice that there is still some residual suffering or some subtle suffering there. Even if you've achieved a basic kind of level of material wealth, happiness, you understand maybe what is good and bad karma on one level, and you're practicing accordingly. If you're a Buddhist, you might say, well, you understand what it means to be a good Buddhist, to try to live in a moral way where you're not harming others. You understand that. But then take a closer look. You might notice, well, there's still frustrations and suffering coming up in your experience. But to notice that, you need to develop mindfulness. And this is why we practice meditation, because you're refining your basic level of awareness, mindfulness, clear comprehension, and then training in observing things more closely, looking more closely, clearly seeing. It's another way of describing this practice of vipassana, clearly seeing the way things are. Because often people are complacent in life and they say, well, I've achieved this much. I've got a home, I've got a job, I've got money, I've got family around me, friends. And they get a bit complacent perhaps. And they say, well, it's good enough. But the Buddha said you have to look more closely, because all of that you may be taking as a self, this is who I am, I've achieved this much in my life, man or woman, I maybe have a job or career, I have a name, I have a place where I live, I have a bank account, I have this, that and the other that we identify with as a self. You maybe have to, from time to time, bring up the question, well, how stable and reliable is all of that I call myself? And as you practice more mindfulness and develop mindfulness through meditation and investigation, well, you'll notice it's not completely stable, not completely reliable, because the nature of the world is subject to change. And that's the first of these three characteristics, anicca laksana, impermanence, instability, change, is very close to not self. They're two sides of the same thing, really. And in between is dukkha, the unsatisfactoriness. Because things are changing and they're not self, we say they're unsatisfactory. There's no lasting, permanent happiness that you can call your own in there. If everything is impermanent, not self, then it's also dukkha. So these three characteristics are three sides of the same thing. And it's by cultivating stronger and more refined mindfulness and awareness that we start to notice that. The most obvious place the Buddha said to look is the physical world. How much of this physical world do you really own and control? And we call this body ourselves, but it's constantly aging and changing. And if we're honest, we don't like that. Nobody likes the fact that their body gets older, and with it comes various issues, aches and pains, illness, injury, and just aging itself is not comfortable, it's not pleasant. We don't look so good, we don't feel so good with age. Even if you're young and healthy, you can notice aging in the people around you. When I was a young monk, Ajahn Kalyano said, when you go on alms round, you notice the older people in the village, their bodies, and the skin on their hands, the wrinkles, the wrinkled feet, the bent backs, the hole in the teeth where there used to be a tooth and now there's a hole there, or a false tooth, the grey hairs, and so on. And none of this is stuff that we particularly revel in or want to see or want to know about. We all want to see people who are looking good, and yet we're surrounded by aging. So Lumpur Cha used to say, watch that, notice that. When you're young, you can at least notice aging in others. And then later on, yourself, you start to age, don't you? So you notice it in yourself. Yeah, and it just begs the question, if this body is a self, if it's me, mine, myself, I should be able to say, don't get old. Don't get sick. Don't have those aches and pains. Don't have the grey hairs, the wrinkles, the backache, and whatever it is. But we can't, because it goes according to nature, causes and conditions. That's one part of the experience of not self. When we're in a peaceful state, we're at ease with ourselves, we can bring this up to contemplate. And we have to accept, this human body is a process of a physical or natural process. It's a combination of different physical elements that's come together. Keep it going, we maintain it, we feed it, we give it food and drink, we look after it to keep it healthy. But we can't stop it aging, and we can't even stop it getting sick half the time. However many supplements you buy and consume, you'll still get sick from time to time, sooner or later. Maybe if you get the amount of supplements wrong, maybe the supplements actually make you sick. It can happen. So the Buddha said, practice mindfulness directed to the body. And straight away it brings up the question, do I really own this body? Am I this body? Of course, if you're able to keep looking young, good, handsome, beautiful, well, for a little bit longer than some other people, you might feed the delusion of self and feel happy that you look good. And it's certainly not wrong to be healthy, but it's also, this is a question you have to keep coming back to. Do you really own this body? Are you this body? And then to look at the mind, our mental experience. Where can you find the self, the soul in all of that? And what is it? Is it the feelings? Pleasure and pain, happiness and suffering? Is it the thoughts? I think, therefore I am. So I'm thinking. I seem to be in control because I can think and I can reason and work things out and know things and remember things and learn things. So we often take knowledge as self. The more we know, the better this self feels, the more value we give to ourselves if we know a lot. And similarly, often we feel down, we feel bad about ourselves when we don't know much. And when we're in an experience when your lack of knowledge is somehow exposed, which happens more and more nowadays because the world is so technologically advanced. Often we're exposed, our inexperience with technology or just not knowing about certain aspects of the world, that we can feel inadequate or feel lost or just feel that we don't know enough. So whether it's feeling good that you know so much or feeling bad that you know so little, either way it's an expression of self, isn't it? A delusion of self. You're connecting with knowledge and saying, this is who I am, what I know. Sometimes it's who I know as well, who I know in this world. If I'm in trouble, maybe I know someone who can get me out of trouble, solve my problems, help me in some way. So we often put a lot of value on who we know. But we have to question that identification with knowledge, thoughts, memory. Ask ourselves, well, how solid is that? How quickly we can lose our memory and forget things, how quickly we can lose knowledge. If you studied anything at one part in your life, later on you can ask yourself, well, how much of that knowledge do you still remember? Up to a point, the first part of our life, we seem to keep all our knowledge and experience with us, and maybe we build on it so it becomes more deeper into ourselves, into our personality. So it seems like we're constantly accumulating more knowledge, more experience, more skills maybe. But maybe as you get older, some of that starts to fade as well. And that's something to be mindful of, take stock of and say, that knowledge I used to have, where's it gone now? If it was self, it should be there at our beck and call. We should be able to command it. Just remember whatever we've learnt. So of course now we're replacing that with technology. So instead of trying to remember things, we just press a button to get that knowledge back. And as long as we've got a button to press and a finger to press it, and we know what to press and when to press it, then we mistake that for self. So our self, our technology and various capabilities, external capabilities, we're saying is like an extension of who we are. But the Buddha's encouragement to us was to come back and look at these things more closely. And that's part of what mindfulness practice is, establishing mindfulness and then paying attention, looking more closely and saying, well, these things I take as self, my feelings, my memories, my thoughts, how reliable are they? One of the delusions that feeds this sense of self is the sense of continuity. We have a body that seems to continue from day to day, even though it is constantly changing. But there still seems to be enough of what was there yesterday is left over today for us to say, well, I'm still here. So that's partly why having a body, a human body, feeds the sense of self, because there's a certain continuity from moment to moment, day to day. And the same thing with our mind, because we do accumulate knowledge and experience and memories, well, we have this sense of one thing leading into another. So from the moment we got up this morning to this moment, we've had many thoughts, emotions, memories go through our mind, our mental experience. It seems like because we can remember it, then it seems like it's just this one self traveling through life, say from morning to night. So that self that got up this morning, well, I've been thinking many thoughts through my day and I'm still here. So it's as if I'm still here, therefore there is still a self. But as soon as you apply mindfulness to your experience, you're also noticing, well, these are distinct moments of thought, feeling, memory. And although there's a link, there's a chain of cause and effect, there is definitely one thing leading into another, but they're actually separate moments and separate experiences. So maybe this thing we've been calling a self and taking as some kind of solid entity is actually made up of many linked moments, separate but linked moments. And that's something we have to question, look into more carefully. It can be a bit confronting, because if you're used to constantly believing in a self, viewing everything from this kind of perspective of a solid, lasting, permanent self, or then anything that challenges that can be quite confronting. Even just the very thought, there is no self. Many people find that quite difficult to cope with. And as you're meditating, sometimes the things that you normally identify with drop away. So like when you're meditating on the breath, why do you feel peaceful? Well, partly because a lot of those thoughts about who you are, what you plan to do, what you did in the past, what you plan to do in the future, how you feel about life, whether it's good or bad, going well, going badly, what you like, what you don't like, the things we normally identify with start to drop away when you're mindful of the breath. And some people find that a little bit disconcerting, even frightening. And many people have this experience in meditation where they're putting attention on the breath, meaning they're letting go of everything else, and their mind starts to settle down. And then at some point they kind of notice that they're no longer thinking of anything else. They're no longer lost in memories or plans about the future. They're just with the breath in the present moment. Maybe body seems to be very light, or maybe even disappeared for a while. And then the thought comes up, well, what's left? Where's the self gone? And that's so challenging to the person, they often feel fear at that moment. And you hear people say, well, it's like standing on top of a high place about to fall off. Sometimes you have it in a dream when you're flying or falling and there's nothing underneath you to hold on to you or to break your fall, say. But in meditation it can be the same. You can get to this point where all the normal things you identify with as self, thoughts, feelings, memories, fade out. And just knowing the breath, which through experience you might actually start to enjoy, but maybe in the beginning it can be a bit disconcerting. So then you question it, you doubt what's happening. Where have my thoughts gone even? Like for me, I'd probably say if all my thoughts had gone quiet, I'd say, well, this is good. I'm finally getting a rest, a bit of peace. But some people are so used to thinking and so used to identifying with their thoughts as who they are, then they get worried or afraid. So you have to be a bit brave, but also curious at that point. You say, well, what happens if I just carry on meditating without this sense of self? It's all gone and I feel a lot of spaciousness or emptiness in the mind. What will happen? And you probably find if you've meditated on this before, nothing much will happen. You just experience deep sense of peace when all the mental chatter and the nagging thoughts and conversations of the mind go quiet. The more experienced you are in meditation, you probably find that's quite enjoyable and quite pleasant. But at first it's saying, well, this thoughts process, trains of thought, feelings, reactions you normally have, they're not actually any kind of lasting, permanent self. They're just momentary experiences, and you're realizing that. So then you sometimes get a question come up, well, what is self? What's left? If it's not the body, it's not the thoughts, the memories, the feelings, well, what's left? And then you might answer, you might say, well, it's just this quality of knowing, the mind that knows, but without thinking a lot, worrying a lot, remembering a lot, doubting, just knowing experience, but without a sense of self. And if you practice meditation regularly, you might experience that from time to time. Hopefully the more you practice, the more often you experience it. And one thing that comes with experience is you're used to it and you're more familiar with it, so then you can be more at peace with peace itself. And sometimes we're not even used to being peaceful within ourselves because we identify so strongly with our thoughts, feelings, and of course the external world, that we're not even used to being peaceful. But if you meditate regularly, maybe you have more experiences where you're just quiet, your mind is quiet, at ease within itself, and not thinking very much, and not holding on or identifying strongly with any particular thought or opinion or view at that time. You might get more used to that and be more at ease with the mind that is just peaceful. And that's a very valuable thing to experience. The self that's gone peaceful, you might say, well, there's still a subtle sense of self there. You might be attaching to the knowing, this quality of knowing as self. Well, true, you may, because our practice is one of developing ever more refined mindfulness, understanding, observing the truth. So it's quite possible your sense of self might stop latching on to particular thoughts and feelings that you've seen as temporary, and now it's latching on to just the quality of knowing the body and mind from a place of detached awareness. There may still be a sense of self arising somewhere along the line, but if you're used to watching and learning from your experience, you keep looking and learning from it. You don't have to worry about that. The old question, well, who is it that knows that the mind is peaceful, or who is the knowing? What is the knowing? Isn't that a self? Well, at first you might call it a self, but later you might notice that the idea of a self is still very temporary. It's just a label, another label you put onto the knowing. So this practice, following the Buddhist path, on the one hand, at every level you could say we're contemplating and investigating what is self and what is not self. On the other hand, you could say the flavor of not self runs through from beginning to end. When we practice kindness and generosity in just ordinary situations, you may say, well, it's all not self, but you can even see not self when you practice thinking of others, maybe putting others before yourself sometimes, or just sharing, helping others. That's already an expression of not self. You're practicing selflessness in certain situations. When you practice dana, for instance. Or practicing sila, you're also practicing not self, because you're just saying, well, I'm just going to keep this precept, whether I feel good about it, bad about it, I'm angry, I'm normal. You can use the precepts to train yourself to help understand not self as well. And of course, meditation. We're cultivating mindfulness and then insight into not self, but before we fully let go of self, we're also cultivating the peace of mind, the rapture, the happiness of a mind that is becoming more peaceful. And you may have a sense of self arising with that, but you can also ask yourself, well, who owns this peace, the peace of the mind? And asking that question repeatedly and observing even the temporary nature of peace and happiness that arises from meditation, you may also get insight into not self. So sometimes we say, well, what we're observing when we're observing not self, it's not that there's nothing there at all. There may be a person meditating, they have a body, they have a feeling, a thought. But what you're observing is that there's no fixed entity we call a self. For a human being, really life is more of a process, isn't it? Changing process of physical and mental phenomena arising, passing away according to different causes and conditions. It's not that there's absolutely nothing there, it's just how we interpret the experience. And the untrained mind, the unenlightened mind, we tend to keep making a mistake by saying, this is me, this is myself, and believing that. Perhaps you could say the more we suffer is the more we believe in the sense of self, the more we'll suffer. The more we cultivate mindfulness and investigate, the less we'll suffer. Because we'll see more that is what we've taken as a self previously is actually a process of physical, mental events, rising, passing away. And the best chance to see that, the best place to see that is when you meditate. It's not the only place, but it's probably the best place, the best time, is to meditate, say like you are now, and just observe the rising and passing away of thoughts, changing nature of this body, feelings, investigate pleasant, unpleasant feelings. Little by little it's revealing the truth, we say the conditioned nature of this body and mind. So that's why we keep coming back to these phrases that we chant so often, sabbe sankhara anicca, all conditions, physical and mental, are impermanent. Sabbe sankhara dukkha, all conditioned things are dukkha, unsatisfactory, unable to provide lasting, permanent happiness. Sabbe dhamma anatta, all phenomena are not self. So maybe I'll leave you with these reflections tonight. We can always return to this topic at another time. But for now we'll leave the talk there and open up for some questions afterwards.